Hello and welcome. This is NetLab 5 and I'm Richard Colson, your host for this video. We're going to take a look at adding and managing virtual hardware. We're specifically going to look at adding and managing virtual disks, but a lot of the same kind of steps will involved in that we'll see later on we can do with things like CPU and memory. Right now you can see that for this lab, rather than logging into the vSphere client, I'm going to be logging on to the ESXi server's client interface. So we'll take a look at that in a moment, how to log into that VMware Host Client. Before we do that, let's take a look at the lab itself. So if we take a look here, we can see that we have 4 sections in this lab. The first is a simple examination of the virtual machine configuration. So we'll take a moment to examine that. Then we're going to create virtual hard disks for that virtual machine. We'll see how we can differentiate between what are called thin provisioned and thin provisioned disks. Then we'll delete that virtual hardware. You'll notice that the objectives pretty much follow the instructions or the sections in the lab. And as a reminder, we're going to use the VMware Host Client that you can see over here, which allows us to connect directly to an ESXi server. Here's our topology. And so we'll be connecting to the server at .51. So in this case, we're going to be connecting using that VMware Host Client to the web server running on the ESX server over here. So we'll bypass working with SAVCSA. Just heads up, what we're going to be doing in this lab, we could have just as easily completed using the vSphere client on the VCSA. But for purposes of learning a little bit more about that ESXi client and how much you can actually do just working directly with that ESXi hypervisor, this lab gives us an opportunity to take a look at that. Note that we'll first examine the virtual machine's configuration, and you can see that right over here. That logging in, we'll be able to take a look at this Photon 01 virtual machine, and we won't be logging into that virtual machine. Rather, what we'll do is we'll look at the interface in the VMware Host Client and look at the different components that are involved in the hardware configuration. And then we'll explore creating and adding virtual hard disks. We'll compare those hard disks in the 2 different hard disk types, thin and thick provisioned. We'll take a look at where those hard disks actually reside in the data stores themselves, and we'll look at the backing files for those. And then finally, we'll delete that virtual hardware, both the disks themselves and the files that those disks contain. All right, that's our lab. Let's go ahead and get on to our next video.